Being a dad isn't always easy, but it's the best thing I ever did. I'm constantly improving myself to be the best dad I can be through fitness, nutrition, mindset, and lifestyle. As fathers, we pass on many things to our children, such as our mindset, our habits, our attitude, and what we've learned along the way. Each of these will shape who our children are and who they will become. The Warrior Dad's mission is to help you become the healthiest version of yourself, to hone your edge, and to live with purpose. My name is Jim Bertamy, and this is the Warrior Dads Podcast. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Warrior Dads Podcast. Today I have Aubrey Huff joining me for the podcast. So I'm really excited about that. Aubrey is a two-time World Series winner. He has a total of 13 years of Major League Baseball experience playing for the Devil Rays, Astros, Orioles, Tigers, and finally the Giants until he retired in 2012. He has two boys of the ages of 10 and 8 and does his very best to be the dad that he didn't have growing up. So he's got a lot to share today, and I think you guys are going to really like his story, some of his experiences, and what he's doing with his current boys. Like I said, to be that father figure in their life. So Aubrey, welcome to the Warrior Dads
Jim, it's
Podcast.
a pleasure being on, man. Thanks for the invite, man.
Absolutely. Appreciate you reaching out. So, I mean, I pretty much summed it up in the intro, but is there anything else that you just want people to know about you right off the bat?
I really don't claim being a Detroit Tiger. That was one of the most miserable experiences of my life. So if you want to go ahead and edit that out in the intro, that'd be great. No, I'm just kidding. No, man. Yeah, I'm retired from baseball 7 years ago, and in 2012, two-time champ. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is when professional athletes get out, it's a tough transition. And I was lucky enough to have my two boys to fall back on and raise them. I like to think that if I didn't have my boys, I don't know where I'd be. It'd be one of those things where I think I'd be lost in the dark. I got divorced last year, and I mean, without them, my life would have been absolutely dark. So, before I had my kids, you just live for yourself. You live for the glory, you live for your dreams, and then you have kids, and you really realize, man, just what love really is. So, that's my biggest mission on this planet now. Now that I have my boys and I'm retired, is my biggest job, and it's not only just a job; it's a pleasure, is to raise my two boys who are 10 and 8 and coach all their little league games and their sports games, basketball, all that good stuff. And it's really
Sure.
helped me get into a very, very positive place in my life.
That's awesome. So I want to ask you then. So you had your oldest boy, who's now 10 years old. You had him while you were playing.
Yeah, it's really interesting because they both have cool stories that I love to tell them. When I was in Baltimore in 2008, my wife Bobby gave birth to my son, who obviously, like you said, he's 10 years old. But that season with the Orioles in 2008, when he was born, it was one of the most amazing. Although we sucked as a team. One of the most amazing statistical seasons for me personally. I think I hit like 311 with 34 homers, 107 RBIs. I won the designated hitter award over David Ortiz, which is hard to do. And so I got that Silver Slugger as a DH, and that's one of the most prestigious hitters in baseball, being a designated hitter. So I tell my son all the time, "You are good luck, my friend. You brought me great luck in 2008, and then in 2010." My youngest son was born, and needless to say, I think everybody knows, it's a Giants fan, we won the World Series in 2010, and I had an unbelievable year with those guys. Pretty much led the team offensively in pretty much every category, and I was 7th in the league in MVP voting. So both of those kids have very unique stories about their dad bragging rights. Yeah, I think my youngest son is I'd rather not mention their names. I almost slipped there, but he's got a little bit more of the bragging rights for sure.
Sure. The World Series over the Silver Slugger, but don't take anything away from the first one either. Right. So you got divorced after you retired. Was that like a sudden thing? Was that just I mean, because I almost feel like it's harder while you're playing, right? With how many games you're away and not being home as much, but then it's like you're retired.
You're playing, because I think as athletes, we're wired a different way to provide, and we're on the road half the time. And, and as we're playing through the game, our wives at the time are so used to us being gone all the time, and having their independence. And as we're on the road, they have their independence, we have ours. And then what happens is we get out of the game, and then we go through this epic battle in our heads of struggle and trying to find meaning and identity and purpose again outside of baseball. And I think sometimes we can be at home too much and drive our wives crazy. And in turn, they
because you're trying to plug into
well. So, I'm actually in my own podcast now, and the basis of the podcast is bringing on a lot of ex-athletes, a lot of people in the entertainment industry that have transitioned out of that limelight and the struggles they face. I mean, 80% of the professional athletes that retire end up getting divorced. 80%, man. I mean, that's 30% more than the general population. So obviously there's a big disconnect there, and a little bit more of awareness needs to come to those people that have been fortunate enough to play in professional sports, or whether you're an entertainer or a singer or an actor. So it's my passion to go on my podcast and start talking to people and bringing awareness to it.
Wow, 80%. 80%. That's a staggering statistic.
I will say this though. I mean, even though it's a heartbreaking time for if you're a professional male athlete, the woman, walks off pretty well.
Yeah. You're right.
It's not all sad for the parties, but anyway, that's a little bitterness.
So what's the split right now?
Neither here nor there.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's the split right now between you and your ex-wife?
We're actually, to be quite honest with you, me and my ex-wife are in a great place. We have great relationship. We go to dinner twice a month with our kids, and we sit next to each other at their sporting events. We consistently, talk with each other, and it's probably better now than when we were married. And we're both 50-50 custody. Neither one of us,
wow.
For those listening out there, neither one of us cheated. It was just one of those things where you get out of the game, we grew apart, and just didn't make it, man. And I think, just like I mentioned earlier, I think you're just so used to a certain lifestyle, and then you smother each other, and you just want different things in life. And, whether or not, you make it is, I think, a lot to do with just how much you communicate and how much you're being willing to be vulnerable to each other. And as professional athletes, being vulnerable is not our forte. And I've learned how to do that in this last couple of years of struggle I've had, through the divorce. And I think a lot of, sometimes God and the universe, whatever you want to call it, but I happen to be a Christian myself, works in mysterious ways. And to be able to open up something in a dark situation has allowed me to open up my podcast, be vulnerable, and be a little bit more fulfilled in my life as far as sharing my story and how I can help others.
I think that's a pretty common theme. Like you're saying among athletes, but I think it's just a really more common theme amongst men too, right? I mean, and about that vulnerability, right? Whether it and being vulnerable doesn't necessarily mean, maybe you can clarify, but when I always think of vulnerability, maybe some of the words or the characteristics I think of being vulnerable, of course, are crying, right? And so it doesn't necessarily have to be the only way that you make yourself vulnerable, but just opening up and having some of those conversations that men don't really like to have, right? So what's one thing, because now you're saying it's really, really prevalent among professionals, right? Whether it be, like you said, sports player or an actor or some kind of entertainer, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. So if somebody's listening who doesn't have that background, but maybe they're really resonating with what you're saying and they have the exact same thing going on, what's one thing that really helped you be more vulnerable?
Well,
and to open up to kind of change that relationship.
Well, I think for me, I don't know how many of your listeners know much about my story, but I suffered mightily after retiring from baseball with anxiety and depression. And I think a lot of that, as I look back at it, is a residual effect of not being vulnerable. And to show that as professional athletes, you're taught to put this warrior face on, not let any fear or doubt or into anybody's psyche. I mean, if that pitcher looks at you, have any kind of fear, you're dead. And so it's hard to turn that off going home in your family life. And I think as I've gotten, out of the game and my marriage has failed, I look back at the time and I look back at all the things that I didn't say to my wife I wish I would have. And I have a really, really good friend in Scottsdale, Arizona. He's my best friend in the world. And we always had this saying in the past where, you know what? I hate it when guys say, my wife is my best friend. That's just such BS, because I wouldn't tell my wife the things I tell you. And then I think to myself, yeah, you're right. But as I look back at it now, I think that was my biggest mistake. I didn't talk to my wife like she was my best friend. I wasn't vulnerable to her. I didn't, because I was ashamed. I was trying to be the man. I was trying to be tough and the provider, the protector. But there was inside internally things that were bothering me that I wouldn't let up because I'm afraid that she would look at me as, weak and not being able to support the family. And so I just bottled that up. And hence, I don't think she thought the communication was there. And I didn't feel the communication was there. And I wasn't being myself. And there comes the anxiety and depression. So my thing is, yeah, you don't have to like snuggle up to your wife in bed and whisper sweet nothings in her ear every night and cry like a baby. No, that's not being a real man. But be
Yeah.
honest with her. And as you're going about your day, I'm like, listen, honey, work was tough today. And, I got to tell you, I don't know how much longer I really want to do this, or just, I don't think a lot of guys want to do this. They don't want to scare their wives or what have you,
Yeah.
And sometimes I think a good, honest talking, even if it's difficult, is necessary.
Now, you mentioned depression. I know you had a little bit of a struggle with some addiction too, right?
1,000%. Yeah, I think that has a lot. I
Adderall.
think that's a stem of not being confident myself growing up as a young man. So, we can touch on that a little later in the show as well. But, well, we might as well go right into it since we're here. When I was 6 years old, my father was an electrician in Abilene, Texas. And I was 6 years old watching the Transformers, like the Optimus Prime, I think at the time was beating the piss out of Megatron, like he always does. And I remember my mom walking into the door, and she was just in full tears, red-faced tears. My grandma and grandpa at the time, I was staying at their house on their couch while she was working, and they meet her at the door, and they just start hugging and crying. I was like, what's going on? They circle around me and told me my father had just been shot, murdered in Abilene, Texas, at an apartment complex.
Oh.
He was trying to break up a domestic dispute between a young man and his wife in the apartment complex that he worked at. And the guy got mad at my dad for trying to break it up, intervened. The killer shot his wife in cold blood. My dad jumped on him, wrestled him around. This woman came out yelling, the manager. He pushed her out of the way. My dad got up, pushed her out of the way as he was going to shoot her. The bullet missed her as he pushed her in and shut the door. My dad started running out the front door of the apartment complex, and the killer came up right behind him as he's running away and shot him in the back of the head in cold blood.
Oh my
And
God.
then the killer just takes off around 2 blocks. A off-duty cop heard the shots, followed him, arrested him. He's doing life in prison. And so, I grew up without a father in Dallas, Texas area. And, in Texas, I didn't have nobody was there to throw the football with me. Nobody was there to throw the baseball with me. I didn't go camping. And, you don't play football in Texas. You grow up, you're kind of an outcast. And so I grew up really insecure. I grew up really afraid, and a diehard mama's boy. And my mom did a great job raising me, but I was raised by her. And I don't think a kid, any boy, should be grown up without a father. And I think that's the epidemic we have in our society today, was so many fathers are either dead, or even worse, they're absent from their lives. And so, and
Maybe not even physically, but mentally checked out,
1,000%. They
right? I
come
mean,
home
just
after
not
work, they
there.
throw a beer down, smoke a cigarette, watch TV all night, and are not engaged in their kids' life. So I know the effects, the residual outcome of what happens to kids without fathers. So with my boys now, that is 100,000,000% my job now, is to be the father I was unable to have for my boys.
Now, what do you say to somebody who looks at you, successful baseball player, 2-time World Series champion, and says, well, look at how he turned out? For one, I actually want to know what your reaction is to something like that. If someone were to turn around and say, well, you're talking about the importance of fatherhood, and this kid didn't have anybody to throw the ball around with, and he goes on to be a successful baseball player, and look at how successful he turned out. One, what's the feeling that you get when you hear something like? Because obviously you're passionate,
well,
right?
I'm
I mean, you're
pretty.
making it your life's mission to make sure that your boys grow up with that father figure, and you're coaching their teams. You're connected with them, it sounds like. So What goes through your head, and what would a response like
Well,
that
I get
be
a lot
to
of
some kind
people.
of negative?
I'm
Yeah.
pretty active on Twitter and social media, Instagram. I'm a very conservative guy by nature, and um,
Hmm.
and so I get a lot of heat from some of the tweets I throw out and some of the Instagram posts I make. And excuse me, I'm going to walk outside here. It's getting a little loud in the gym for everybody, so I'm outside right now. You still hear me all right? Okay,
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
And so, I get a lot of these posts where I'm just expressing my opinion. I think a lot of us have our opinions, and we live in a society today where, if you have certain beliefs, people unfriend you on Facebook or whatever, and it's just ridiculous. I don't try to subscribe to or try to make other people to believe what I believe in, but I'm unafraid in talking about what I believe in and my faith and my love for God and country and I get a lot of these people on Twitter or whatever, just hey Aubrey, your white privilege is showing. I'm like, what? And I tell people,
What's one example of that?
well,
What's one of the most recent
so
examples
I
you
went
can
on
think of?
Twitter and made a video. A recent example was the Boston Red Sox said half the team refused to go to the White House, the other half did, and that was a straw that broke the camel's back. I'm just so sick of hearing about all these teams that refuse to go. Now, I went to the White House once when in 2010 after we won the World Series, and I didn't vote for Obama. I wasn't a fan of his. I went anyway because I wanted to experience the rich history of our nation, and that's what I said in my Twitter video. And basically, I didn't call anybody out. I was just, stating what I believed in, and there was nothing
Hmm.
racist about it. There was nothing about it that was bad, but everybody came out of the woodworks and perceived what they thought I meant, which was I'm a racist, I'm a bigot, and all this stuff, and it was just ridiculous. And so, that was one of the recent examples, and the white privilege is showing. And what I try to tell people all the time, man, is like, listen, I grew up in a double wide trailer park, which is which is really rough on a kid with no dad who was murdered at 6 years old. I had every excuse in the world to play the victim and all this stuff, and I still was able to go to the big leagues and live my dream because I didn't play that victim card and use that as an excuse to not be successful. And I think a lot of people in society today they use their past as excuses and wear other people out that've been successful because they're afraid. And that's a lot of what I speak on my podcast as well. Let's get rid of this victim mentality we all seem to have, and the minute we do that, we're free to do what we love. And I'm not a divisive guy by any means, but I will stand up for myself, and I will stand up for what I believe in. And so, it's gotten me in trouble in the past, but I don't care. That's who I am, and I feel like I'm lying to myself, and I'm lying to my spirit when I try to censor myself, and I just won't do that.
Yeah. No, hey man, I thank you for that, and maybe it's just ignorance, but I'm trying to think as you're talking. It's like, what are you talking? Like, who's saying that you're playing the race card? And obviously, maybe I don't have the full context of it because I didn't see the video or the post. But it's like, well, how by you saying that you don't really agree with the ball? Who was it again? The Padres didn't go to the White House.
No, it was the Red Sox.
The
Yeah,
Red Sox. They didn't go to the White House. What does that have to do with race?
right, right. Well, that's the problem with Twitter, and most of those comments came from Twitter, and you don't know who they are. And that's what I love
Yeah.
about Twitter. You can have the Twitter tough, strong fingers, and that's with a fake identity. See, I'm very, once you have the little blue check mark thingy on your Twitter, that is you, and everybody knows it. But if you're just some random Joe with 3 followers, you can say whatever you want. And for the majority
Right.
of those people, that's who fire at you, and
Yeah.
it doesn't hurt my feelings. I to be honest with you, Jim, I kind of enjoy those kind of conversations because I'm a very sarcastic, witty guy. I grew up in a clubhouse pretty much my whole life, and if you don't have thick skin in a clubhouse and be able to wear guys out because they wear you out, then you're not going to make it. So I
Yeah.
enjoy those kind of comments. I love to talk back, and if my whole thing is like, if you can't dish out a comment, if you can't take it, don't you dish it out, and most of them can.
Right. Right. Man, just I don't know. I'm not very active on Twitter. I don't really even understand Twitter fully, and I know there's people that swear by it, but I don't know. I'm actually still not even. I'm 35 years old, and I still don't really like social media that much, and I just really can't stand the way it's being used. And now you have people, because I feel like people focus on such the wrong
Right.
stuff, right? There's so many more things that we could be focusing on, or putting our energy into, instead of like on Facebook now, you can hit like, and it's been around for a little while now, but you can hit like, you can hit love, you can give the laugh emoji icon or whatever. You can give a sad face, angry face. I'm like, what? Because now you have people saying, well, they only liked my post. They didn't love it, or they didn't laugh at it. And I'm like, Mark Zuckerberg should be ashamed of putting that out there if he's the one who invented that. Because I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You're giving people more things to focus on the social
Well,
media
I got to be
platform.
honest, Jim.
It's
I hate it. I
ridiculous.
hate social media, but I think if you're promoting a business nowadays, or you're trying to do podcasting, like which we both are, I think it's an absolute necessity to have it.
It is
And
because that's where people's attention are. So
1000%,
from a marketing
especially the young
perspective,
generation. And
yeah,
you're right. I want to punch Mark Zuckerberg in the face for actually, I want to punch Steve Jobs for making the touch phone, but
the iPhone, right, yeah.
But it is a necessary part of our world. And what has happened, especially in the last few years, I would say in the last 5 years, is social media has become a weapon. And it's a silent weapon. It doesn't kill anybody. Well, that's not true, actually.
Well,
That's not true. Some of these young kids are committing suicide over cyberbullying and Facebook and Twitter. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And my boys, since we're talking about being a father, my boy's 10 and he's begging everybody, and I live here in Solana Beach, California, where it's uppity here at times. And I'm a Texas boy at heart, and I feel like I'm trapped here in California, but my ex-wife loves it. So, but that's another thing. But it's all their friends are 10. They got the new iPhone 10s, and they're the whole deal. And my ex and I are in agreement. Listen, you're not getting a freaking iPhone 10s for $1,000. He's got a little flip phone. They can send text and calls only. No smartphone or whatever, just for emergencies. But we told him, you get in high school, all right, maybe we'll think about an iPhone. But right now, you're just going to be a kid, and you're not going to get on this social media in junior high where all these girls and boys are talking trash behind your back. And I told them, I told both of them, I tell them this all the time. If you ever have anybody talking trash, whether it's online to you, behind your back, and I want you to walk up to them, tell them not to do it. If they continue to do it, I want you to walk up to them. I don't care where you are. If you're at school, punch them right in the nose. And they're like, what? What if I get suspended? I'm like, well, if you get suspended, we'll go on a first-class trip to Hawaii, boys. Because, I mean, that's going to stop that bullying bullshit right there. And you know what I mean? So that's where I draw the line. Listen, I'm tired of the go tell the teacher thing. You want to get your kid punched and picked on more, go tell the teacher and go tell the principal. Or if you want to handle it right then and there, punch the bully in the mouth, and he will become your best friend. And I have a great example of that. Well, when I was a kid, I was 8 years old, and I had this guy that went to my school. He's probably 9 years, probably a grade older than me. And I had just gotten a new dog, and the dog was everything to me. Obviously, my dad passed away. The dog was a boy. He was like the only male in my life. So I fell in love with this dog. And every day we're going to the bus stop. This bully, I'm going to take your dog. That's my dog. I'm going to keep that dog. I'm going to steal it. It's going to be my dog. And he was dead serious. And I'm like, no. And it just bothered me for weeks and weeks. And then finally one day he goes at the bus stop, I'm coming today to get your dog. Book it. And I'm like, oh, no. So I'm at home after school, and my grandpa happens to be over at my house while my mom's working. And all of a sudden I'm in my room and I hear this voice. It was like that movie from Troy where you hear Brad Pitt yell, Hector, right?
Standing outside the gates.
I hear this kid, his name was Justin, out of my road. Aubrey, I'm here for your dog. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'm in my room crying. My grandpa comes in, he goes, what is that guy out there doing? Who is that kid, boy? My grandpa's a diehard Texas boy. He's like 6'4", massive. And I told him the story. My grandpa said, son, if you don't go out there right now, stand up to that bully and punch him right in the mouth, he'll be doing that forever. You'll never feel good about yourself. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do it. Grandpa goes, get out there, boy. And I was just terrified. But I did it anyway to make my grandpa proud, even if I knew I was going to get my butt kicked.
Did you know how to punch?
Not really. Never been a fight in my life. But, I was a pretty big kid. And actually, I was probably bigger than this kid. But he was a year older, and I was just scared. I was a mama's boy. And I walked out there. He was like talking trash on the way. Where's my dog? Where's my dog? As I get closer to something, and I look back at my grandpa, he's looking out the window and just gives me the nod. And as I walked up to him, I clenched my fist and I punched him as hard as I possibly could right in the nose. The kid falls down. he looks me in the eyes. He's holding his nose with blood coming down his nose. And I'm thinking he's going to pop up and come get me. He just goes, you're going to pay for that, and runs off. I walked back to my grandpa, his chest out, my chest is out. It was in that moment I felt like a man. And he gives me the biggest hug he had never given me in his life. And I felt so proud. The next day at school, that kid Justin comes up to me with his black and blue nose. He says, hey, man, hey, you want to be friends? Well,
Wow.
and to this day, we still talk to this day. So kids out there.
Do you really? You
absolutely.
Still talk to this day?
He's like, we talk quite often. And so, dads out there, kids out there, man, take up for yourself. We've lost that edge. We've lost that.
That's like a little rite of passage.
1,000%. I say that because I experienced it. So there you go.
Wow. It's so funny, about the kid wondering whether, well, what if I get suspended? It's like the kids are more afraid to get in trouble at school than they are at home. But years ago, I can remember hearing stories from my parents. If they messed up at school and the principal or their teacher called home or wrote a letter or something like that, they would get whooped at home. So they were more scared of the beating that the kids would be more scared of the beating that they get at home than they did in school.
You kidding me?
Because they screwed up at school.
We used to get beat by the principal at school.
Oh, I've heard stories like that too. Well, I mean, I think my dad and my mom growing up, they went to Catholic school, so they'd get the wooden ruler across the knuckles or something like that.
We would get the paddle with the holes in it, and the principal would beat us in the principal's office. And that
Wow.
was growing up in Texas. That's how we grew up. And today, if that happened today, you're the principal's fired. He's in jail for child abuse, which is, I mean, I think we're raising an entire generation of weaklings, and I hate to say that because there's so many great kids out there. Like I said, I live in Southern California, and I coach a lot of baseball teams, and I see a lot of kids that are in we practice in like 80 degrees here, and they're like burning up, getting cramps, like, oh, my leg is cramping up at 8 or 9 years old, and they're like, I'm so hot, and I'm like, what in the world? And then I go to Texas to visit my mom in Houston during the summer, and these kids are in full football gear in 100-degree weather, just grinding it out with no excuses. It's a completely different area. I don't know what it is out here in the West Coast, but just kids here seem to be a little bit softer than the kids in the South.
Interesting. I do agree that society as a whole definitely weaker, weaker physically, weaker mentally, weaker emotionally. However, I still wouldn't want my son's principal hitting him. You know what I mean? If someone's going to discipline my kid, I feel like it's me. You know what I mean? Especially if, like, using a paddle or something like that. I don't know. I feel like the kid's defenseless, and I'm like, I never had that experience, but I feel like, you know what, you're going to get yours when I get older, man. That's what I would feel. If
I wouldn't mind if
doing something like that to me.
My kid acted up in school. Hey, principal whacked him a couple times. So be it.
Yeah. But I like taking the fear. I do like taking the fear out of the child and not worrying about the repercussions they're going to get at school, whether it's a principal or their teacher, or they're going to have to show up for detention, or they get suspended, God forbid, whatever it is. Like, who cares about that? You have to deal. If I'm okay with it and I'm telling you it's fine, then I'll deal with your principal. I'll deal with your teacher. But if I know you did the right thing for the right reason, then you're all good in my book, type deal, and that's kind of the way I look at it for my son. And I've told him that before too. Someone's messing with you on the playground or something like that, like, hopefully everybody's getting along, everybody's doing the right thing. But if someone's acting up or someone's, picking on you, you do whatever you got to do, but you don't start it, and you don't be the instigator. You don't be the bully.
That's right. You don't start it, but you finish it. And what I always tell my boys, so my boys are pretty big for their size. I mean, both of them for their school, they're probably about 6 inches taller than any kid in their class. And I said, listen.
Oh, wow. That's significant.
They're giants. And
especially at that age, 10 and 8. I mean, that's significant.
My oldest is a pretty good basketball player. My youngest has daddy's swing. He's going to be the baseball guy. But, I tell them all the time at school, listen, just don't take up for yourself. If you see somebody getting picked by somebody older, take up for them too. Be a leader, not a follower. Go out there and, don't let bullies, pick on kids younger than them. You guys are big kids, but I will say this: we do live in a society and in schools where they're getting shot up constantly. It's scary out there. So you don't know who to step to, and you just don't know who's going to bring a gun to school. And I don't know. It's a different culture than it used to be. We used to handle our problems as kids with our fist, and
Mm-hmm.
that was it. Now you have to worry about somebody bringing a gun or a knife to school, and it's kind of scary.
It is. It really is. I mean, we had, speaking of Twitter, we had someone reach out to our superintendent in our school district and threaten to shoot up the schools. And they didn't specify which school, so they shut down every single school in our district. And it was someone in Canada. And they arrested him. The FBI got involved. They arrested him. And nothing really came of it because it was kind of an empty threat. But, they did shut down the schools for a day and then had police on the property for, a week or so. So it is really crazy. But, back to what you were saying, it's handled differently. You have a little argument, a couple fists are thrown, your friends the next day.
Yeah, 1,000%.
You shake hands and you have respect for each other, and then it's all good. So yeah, it is different. My son and I, we both do jujitsu. So my son is a little bit smaller. I think he's going to hit a growth spurt at some point and get to be bigger. I mean, I'm like 5'11", and my wife's about 5'7", so she's a little taller than the average woman. So hopefully he's going to be like 6'1" or something like that. So that's what I'm picturing. But you're tall, right? You're six, like 6'2".
I'm 6'4", about 230. Yeah, so
230. Okay, so you're a big guy too. So that's where your sons probably get it from. But it's I tell my son the same thing. You're not going to be the person that laughs on the side if you see someone getting bothered. You're gonna go over and help them out. Go over and do the right thing. Be that leader. So I love everything that you're teaching your boys, because it's really in line with what I'm teaching my son. He's 6. He'll be 7 next month.
Well,
so a little younger than your boys.
I tell you, man, I think I guess you call me a diehard traditionalist, and I just think we live in a world, society, educational wise, where I think a lot of our boys, especially, are being feminized in this culture we live in, and it's one of those things where I tell my boys, listen, the majority of teachers are female, and I get it, but I think it's such a dangerous time in our country when boys at 8 to 10, whatever it is, we're a little bit more rambunctious at that age than girls are, and that's natural. And as a guy that's taken pills before, Adderall, Ritalin himself, all these things, they're giving these kids these pills like Skittles because they're being disruptive in class. Now, it's not because they have ADD, ADHD, or whatever. Some might, but the overwhelming majority of them are just being kids. And we're dumbing these kids down with medication just so they'll be quiet in class. And that's just not right. And I think that's a system of control that our little boys are being taught to shut up in class and just sit there. And that's not in our nature. It's just not how we're meant to be aggressive. We're meant to be a little bit more rambunctious and competitive. And that's just, we're meant to play, cowboys and Indians and all these awesome games, to be warriors. And that's in our DNA. And that is being stripped away from kids from the educational system. PE is being taken out. Recess is being taken out. It's just, and then they expect these kids to sit there and be quiet. So I just don't agree with a lot of what's going on.
Yeah, I heard you guys are being exposed to that more in California with the PE being taken away, right? And because kids, I don't know, someone died on a racetrack or something like that, or in a gym class out in California not too long ago. Kid, high school, collapsed or whatever, and now they're being more strict on the physical education classes out in California. Does that ring a bell or anything?
Ring a bell, but I mean, I've heard stories of that, not just in California, but all over the United States. But listen, man, I mean, maybe it's because these kind of things were happening when we were younger, but the media just wasn't as relevant, as big as it is now. I mean, you have one negative story of something like that happens, it's on Twitter and Instagram like that. We didn't have all that back then, so we didn't hear all the bad news, and now everything's negative news and bad news that sells, and that's what we hear most of.
Yeah, well, I think tying it back into what you were talking about earlier, when we were talking about more about being vulnerable, right? And so, if we're trying to downplay machoism, so we should probably specify by saying being macho isn't being a man, right? Being macho isn't necessarily a characteristic of masculinity, right? You don't have to be macho to be masculine, or you don't have to act like a dick to be a man, or
doubt.
to be masculine, right? And so if you're this macho guy who thinks you can't open up or something like that, or you're going to be looked at as a softie, then that's not really a good portrayal of what a man should be anyway. But I think that's really what society kind of views it, and they're trying to downplay the machoism, but in masculinity is being just chopped off at the legs. And so the thing is that, finding that balance and teaching society and educating society around this is that finding that balance of being that vulnerable man doesn't make you soft, even though you may have a soft side.
Right.
Especially as a father, especially as a dad now, I see something on TV where it's a dad and the son, or I love you this or that. I mean, not just, in the drop of a hat or something like that, but if it's a really emotional scene, I get like a little choked up because I'm looking at it as like, wow, that's, I'm relating that back to a, experience maybe that my son and I had. Right. So, but just because someone has a soft side doesn't make them quote unquote soft.
Listen, I consider myself
right?
an alpha male. Right. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like you talk about crying in an emotional movie or what have you. I mean, as a guy that's pretty confident in his manhood, I'm watching superhero movies, and I'll cry at superhero movies because when Iron Man died, and I was like, oh! Right. So listen, I'm not afraid.
Wait, I don't know what
Are
you talking about? The new Avengers movie?
You can say the spoilers now. It's been out for 3 weeks. The spoiler alert's gone.
I haven't had one spoiler alert on.
Oh, so I just ruined it for you, didn't I?
Holy shit!
Well, hey, listen. If you haven't seen it by now, then you're an idiot. That's your fault.
I need someone to go with. It's 3 hours long, and my wife does not want to sit through a 3-hour movie.
And if you don't know that Iron Man's going to die at the end of this movie, then you're not a very avid Marvel Avengers guy anyway. Everybody knew that. Come on, man.
I did not know that. I did not follow the comic books. I'm not a comic book guy.
It's been out for a month, for crying out loud.
I know. I'm just trying to find somebody to go. I refuse to go to the movies by myself.
Well,
my wife's already been to the Avengers 1 and 2 with me, and she fell asleep at the biggest fight scene.
Well, you might want to, since you can edit this, you might want to dub that out then for your listeners, and they'll probably be pissed at you for allowing me to.
No, screw that. If it's ruined for me, it's ruined for them.
That's great. Oh, well.
Oh, I mean, no, the movie's not ruined for me, but I cannot believe that happens because I love Tony Stark. I think it's just awesome. I didn't even know really anything until the very first Iron Man movie came out. I didn't even know very much about Iron Man. I just watch superhero movies just because it's cool. There's, shit blowing up. The aspect of a superhero to a boy, it's like, yeah, man, I want to be that guy.
Well, to me, speaking of alpha males, right, or being vulnerable, I mean, to me, I think Tony Stark is a great example of a guy that's the alpha male type, and I think you've seen him grow through his through the series of Marvel Avengers. Like when the first Iron Man movie, he's just this cocky, arrogant prick who's all about himself, working all the women, the whole deal, and you're like just rich and a playboy, and you're like, that's kind of you can tell there's a lot of issues with this guy internally. He's overcompensated with a lot of ego. Right. And as you see him go through the movie after movie after movie, he meets Pepper Potts, he falls in love. And you see this transition from a guy that's, cocky and arrogant to a guy that's truly confident, in love with a woman, and becomes the guy that ends up saving all of humanity. Right. Like that, to me, that's a guy. You saw a transition of a guy who was kind of a boy, a childish boy that was kind of a douchebag, like the macho douchebag that really wasn't confident, to a guy that really turned out to be confident. And what was interesting, as a guy that's experienced anxiety and depression, and in one of the middle movies as Iron Man, I think it was Iron Man 2, 3, Tony Stark had anxiety. He was like getting depression and anxiety, right? And I think a lot of that was probably because of this internal struggle he has of trying to, be somebody he's not. And then he finally gets over it. He's with Pepper Potts, and he knows who he is and what he has to do. And he's an Avenger now, and he's got a purpose. And I just think it's really cool to see how he transformed from that douchebag guy to a true leader, not only, for the Avengers. I mean, he was the guy for the Avengers. All these guys had superhero powers, like God powers. This guy was just a man, in a suit.
Right. With just a lot of money.
Right.
And
right.
Suit.
Right.
Kind of like Batman.
His superpowers, he's rich.
Right, exactly. His ego got him in trouble when he created Ultron, but that's a whole other thing. But I mean, that's a great example. So I just feel like we how do we put that message into society where it's like, all right, hey, we're not trying to, the goal is to chop masculinity down. It's to educate people on how to actually be a man, and being a man doesn't mean being a macho asshole.
Right. 100%.
Right. And that's the message I think that's lacking. That's the differential piece that's missing in that whole explanation, is that you're not trying to act like this guy who's walking around, who's the tough guy walking around puffing his chest out all the time. And that's not necessarily always what the alpha male is. The alpha male is just someone who, kind of like what you're doing on Twitter, right? You stand up for what you believe in. You're unapologetically voicing your opinion, and not being a douche about it.
Right.
Really, I mean, people that their opinion's wrong and this and that. You have to look at the characteristics of an alpha male. So I love that. You know what? And before, I know we're coming up on our time here, but you had told me that you do something really cool with your boys, in that you don't do the G movies, you don't do the PG movies. What do you do with your boys?
Man. I just find it hilarious. These dads or parents that take their kids to school and they're listening to Baby Shark, and the kids are like 8 or 10.
God, don't even get me started on
not
Baby
only
Shark.
Are you making your kid insane, I think, quietly, but it's making you insane, right? My young, listen, I tell my kids all the time, we play violent video games. We play, was it Call of Duty the other night? We've watched all the superhero movies, even Deadpool, right? And they're
wow.
10 and 8, right? And we listen to Eminem. And my young man, my 10-year-old's a rapper. And you know what he got? He goes around and he raps to people, like at restaurants and stuff. We go up to tables and just rap it, and they love it. They just enjoy it. He's so confident, and as I think we try to cuddle kids too much. When I was growing up as a kid, I watched HBO with my mom, and I was really young, and HBO, I was watching the rated R movies, and I just didn't. I don't believe that what we expose our kids, as long as we are a part of it. Now, if kids are going off sneaking behind your back and watching these things because you forbid it all the time, then they're going to have this. But if you're watching Deadpool with them, or you're listening to Eminem with them, and you let them know, like, listen, just because you're listening to this doesn't mean you can use that language. It doesn't mean you can be that way. And what's funny is my 10-year-old is doing he's going to be at a banquet in 2 weeks, because he won the most inspirational kid award at his school. And that's out of all the kids at his school, which is about, over 1,000 kids. He won the most inspirational kid. Here's a kid that watches Deadpool with his dad. Here's a kid that listens to rap and plays deadly video games. Right. So, it's all about how you raise them. It's not about what, it's not, don't use that excuse like, well, I'm going to have my kid, watch G-rated Disney movies. And deep down inside, these kids just aren't really learning about what the real world is. I think if you shelter them too long, even when they're younger, they're going to rebel. I mean, I believe when my kids get to that age where it's time to go have a beer at like 13, 14, I'll give them a beer at camping, so it's not such a big deal, right? For me, it was such a big deal to my mom. And, whenever I got out to party, I became a binge drinker for a while there, because, oh my gosh, this is forbidden fruit. Right. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. We haven't done, we've watched PG-13 movies with him, a little bit more. I mean, nothing like crazy, Pirates of the Caribbean. There's a lot of action in that, and he's not scared by really anything so far. He's dying to watch Halloween, the original Halloween. I'm like, no, you're a little too young. I mean, he's 6, you know what I mean? So I was actually going to ask you, when did you start that with them? And then I agree with you about the like something with the alcohol, because actually my parents did that. You have a little wine here and there, or, you want a little sip of beer. I'd be outside with my dad grilling, because I grew up in Philly in the city, and, we're out back barbecuing, and my dad would give me a sip here and there. And it wasn't that big of a deal to me when I got older. Like, the curiosity was taken away from me, and it was because it was more a part of it. Italian family, you have a little bit of wine with dinner, not a lot, but, a couple sips as a, 8, 9, 10-year-old. We go out to dinner, my mom's got a whiskey sour or something like that, take a little sip, hey, you want to try it? And we do the same thing with my son, and so it's taking that curiosity away from him. He'll hear some adults, some of our friends will, drop like, they'll say like, "Oh shit," or something like that, and he'll just look over at me and be like, like he knows the word. We don't say it here around the house. It's we're pretty careful with what we say around him, because we don't want him to think like that's how you should talk, or these are the words that you need to use, or it's cool to do that as an adult. So we scale back, what we say sometimes around the house, but he'll hear it from somewhere else, and he'll know, and there'll just be like that look between him and I, like that unspoken, like he's like, all right, I know I'm not supposed to say it, but I heard what he said, type deal. So when did you start that with the movies with your kids?
Probably when probably when they turned probably when they're 8. My oldest was 8 when we started doing that.
So just recently, because your youngest is 8, right?
I wouldn't even my oldest, when he was watching my 6-year-old, I wouldn't let him get into that yet. And don't get me wrong, I mean, whenever it comes on like a sex scene with Deadpool, I fast forward that part. But like the cussing stuff, man, listen, at the end of the day, both of my boys have been in big league locker rooms for a lot of years, right? When they were younger, and even now when the Giants come to town, I'll have them in the locker room. They hear that shit all the time, right? And they even hear it at their schools. So listen, it's not, you're never going to hide your kids from the world. And to me, I want them to be exposed to the world. And, like I said, I'm a Christian guy myself. I like to push the envelope in this society, because I think, a lot of what the world is now spiritually is, I think the world's teaching the world that Jesus came to this earth and he was kind of a wimp, right? And he was far from it. He liked to drink some wine. He turned water into wine, right? and he called the Pharisees brood of vipers. Now, they didn't have cussing back then, but I would like to think that brood of vipers is the same as calling somebody an asshole, right? So, listen, language is what you make of it, and the choices you make. I'm teaching my boys at a young age, to make right decisions, and be exposed. And in order to make right decisions, they have to be exposed to a world that they're going to be a part of. And so to me, that makes more sense than guarding them from a fake world that doesn't exist and playing Elsa's, music from the movie, whatever that is. And that's just not the real world. The real world we live in is, it's got some harsh language. It's got some crazy stuff that happens. And, I think the younger you get them exposed to that and be truthful with them, the better off they'll be.
Yeah. But then teach them the right from wrong, right? So I mean, you like you mentioned that you listen to Eminem with your son, but when he goes up to take people in the restaurant and start rapping with them, he's not using the same language Eminem.
No, he never does. Even with me at home, he doesn't cuss. He just doesn't, because he knows better. He knows not to do that. But I don't mind him listening to it, because that's just the world he's going to be growing up in. So I'm not, and he knows me. He knows I played in the big leagues. They both know that. They've heard baseball players talk. Dad, you used to talk like that? Yeah. Sometimes I still do. Right. So, don't lie to them. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, that's true too. All right. Well, I know we got to get going. So, but before we end the interview, as we do with every episode, I have 10 questions for you that I liked adding in, that were inspired by James Lipton and Bernard Pivot. So you ready to go?
Yeah, buddy.
All right, man. Number 1, who was your hero?
My hero growing up was my mom. She just, like I said earlier, she grew up without my dad there and raised my sister and I all by herself.
Nice. What excites you?
To me, just I think my podcast I got right now excites the crap out of me. But more importantly, I think family-wise, my kids, coaching my kids excites me, and seeing them grow.
What turns you off?
Unconfident women. and too many selfies of women. Too many women selfies. Can't stand it.
Yeah. What is your favorite sound?
The sound of my kids laughing.
Mine too. My son, not your kids.
That'd be a little weird, Jim.
Yeah, definitely weird. What is your least favorite sound?
Whenever I hear the nails on the chalkboard, if I hear that, I'm over it. I can't take it.
What is your favorite quote or saying?
If the dream is big enough, the odds don't matter.
Nice. I like that. Who said that? Do you know?
That was a motivational speaker I heard. Les Brown said it in a motivational talk that I heard on YouTube. I don't even think he said it. He was quoting another motivational speaker, but I can't even remember who it was, but I didn't care. I loved it.
Absolutely. In a couple words, what should a dad be?
Fully engaged.
Nice. And in a couple words, what should a dad not be?
Deadbeat.
If you could try any other profession, what would it be?
Probably an actor.
Okay,
I could
cool.
bring some conservative values to the Hollywood.
Maybe some of the guests that you have on your podcast will be able to help you out with
Possibly.
that. And finally, what would you like to be remembered for?
To leave a legacy for my kids, because I didn't have that growing up from my dad. So, like I said earlier, that's my biggest mission on this. I want to one day put my head on my deathbed and know that I gave my kids, my boys, the best, greatest opportunity to not struggle mentally the way I did growing up.
Very nice. Aubrey, tell everybody where they can find out more about you, your podcast. I'll put all the links in there below, but I want to hear
just launched
you. Where do you want everybody to find
just launched the podcast. It's called Off the Cuff with Aubrey Huff. Just launched it 2 weeks ago, and we only have 2 episodes out right now. They just got approved by Apple iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and you can go on there and check it out. I'm on Instagram at HuffDaddy76. I'm on Twitter, where I'm a little bit more confrontational at Aubrey_Huff. And I'm on Facebook at Huff Daddy Dog, but I'm not very active on Facebook. I think it sucks.
And your website too.
My website is www.aubreyhuff.com.
Awesome. /off the cuff with, I think, some dashes in there, but the link to the podcast is right there, so they can find that there too. Awesome. Aubrey, thank you so much for coming on the Warrior Dads podcast. We really appreciate it.
Man.
Loved everything you said.
Man. It's great talking with you.
Thanks, man. You too.
Bye.
Hey, guys. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Warrior Dads podcast. If you like this podcast and want to support it, please subscribe, leave comments, and share it with someone you think would benefit from listening as well. Thanks again, and keep on being a warrior dad.